Exclusive corporate funding for American Experience is provided by Liberty Mutual. Major funding is made possible by the Alfred P. Sloan Foundation. American Experience is also made possible by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting and viewers like you. Thank you.
It was the summer of 1969. I was an Army prosecutor at Fort Benning, Georgia. I was sitting in my office and my supervisor walked in, closed the door, looked at me and said, "Have you ever heard of Pinkville?" And I said, "No, I haven't." And he briefly described what Pinkville was. It was a place on a map of Vietnam, and there had been an operation there.
Charges have been made that troops killed as many as 567 South Vietnamese civilians during a sweep in March 1968. A lieutenant has been charged with murder and a staff sergeant with assault with intent to murder.
By that point, the Army had conducted an investigation. Quite a record had been established. A lot of people had been interviewed.
Did Camp Medina say anything about what the company should do in the village?
He said that there wasn't going to be anything left alive in the village.
It was clear that many, many people had died. Old men, women with children in their arms, and babies. And they had been unarmed, they had been unresisting, and they had been, in my judgment, massacred.
Lieutenant Calley came back and he said, take care of him. And he says, I mean, kill him.
When they were all just lined up and shot like that, it sort of reminded me of newsreels of Hitler.
There certainly appeared that there had been an effort to cover up what happened at My Lai. That seemed to be clear.
Did Mr. Thompson mention anything to you about landing alongside of a ditch that contained a large number of bodies?
No, sir, he did not report to me any incident of a U.S. soldier firing into a ditch.
To bring a case like this, given its potential magnitude, it had to be solid. It had to be very strong. It had to be believable. And it had to make believable an event which nobody would ever want to believe. The question was, what was this scale that we were dealing with? How big was this? And who did it? Who killed these people?
Charlie Company was a cross-section of just your general basic young people at that point in time. We were from all over the country, you know, East Coast, West Coast, blacks, whites, Mexicans. There was nothing special about us. We were just your common, ordinary teen. I'd gone to college for a couple semesters after high school. I wasn't cut out for college. I went to be a teacher, and it was like, no, the wrong profession. Having grown up with parents that came from World War II and people that were in the Korean War and everything, being exposed to their generations, yeah, you felt it was basically your duty to go ahead and go to war.
My father was a battalion commander in World War II. I considered him kind of a cross between John Wayne and Steve McQueen or something. I did have a notion of what it was going to be like, that it was patriotic, that it was the thing to do.
I was born in Utah. Pretty typical Mormon family. I went into the Army right out of high school.
In the Vietnam War, U.S. Marines battled North Vietnamese throughout the day.
Vietnam was all around us. You know, it was in the press and talking about it in school. And we had a real strong curiosity. We wanted to see it for ourselves.
The artillery is trying to suppress a communist attack on Baker Company, which is about 5,000 meters to our front.
Aside from just the sense of adventure, I was caught up a little bit in the domino theory that it truly was a necessary war.
You know, when I first went, I was into the idea that I was going to free these people and stop communists from spreading. I didn't go over there to be a hero or nothing. I went over there to do my job. When I first landed in Hawaii, I thought I was in paradise. I mean, 70-some degrees at 3 o'clock in the morning, and then they bust us out the Schofield Barracks, and there's banana trees and everything, so I thought it was paradise. Well, it didn't take long for that to end. The East Range, where we did most of our training, it was straight up and down, and it was a real jungle.
It's quite clear that in Hawaii, they excelled themselves in the jungles. Charlie Company was voted the best company in the 1st 20th Battalion. Their captain was almost a folk hero. Medina had come up through the ranks from a Mexican-American background. He related to the men. He was a hard man. He didn't give them an easy time, but they respected him. And many of them loved him.
The motto of the Army is follow me, and he was the type of individual you would follow anywhere and do anything for.
I found Captain Medina to be a very tough individual and very demanding. He wanted us to be something unique and different and, you know, strong and capable and a force to deal with. Captain Medina came up with the idea that we were going to be called the death dealers. He wanted us to carry aces of spades, and every time we killed a Viet Cong, we were to leave the ace of spades on it, so that, you know, they knew that it was from the death dealers.
Lieutenant Calley was platoon leader of 1st Platoon. Young lieutenants are not liked very well. Some are quite gung-ho, some are quite interested in making a name for themselves. Calley was sort of a mixture. He wanted to fit in. I think when he found the military, he thought he found his calling. He found a place to fit in.
My first impression of Lieutenant Calley was he was always trying to please Captain Medina. He'd go out of his way to do things that were not called for, and trying to please Captain Medina, and that, to me, it made, in my mind, it made Captain Medina resent him even more.
Captain Medina would just call him a little shit or something. And he ridiculed Calley. He made Calley feel inadequate, and Calley was always trying to do things to show that he was a real officer.
By asserting his rank, he basically shielded himself from his men. He isolated himself. Rank went to his head, and that's a no-no.
For the first month, it was like, where's the war? You know, we had a lot of free time. The lounges, you know, the bars, it was really nice. We said, hey, I could do this for a year. We'd walk through the villages, mostly women, children, older people. We really didn't encounter anything when we went. It didn't seem like there was a war going on over there.
He would go to a village, set up a perimeter. Medics and doctors would come in, treat the civilians, and we'd sit there and play with the kids, and there was nothing else to do. We always had fun with the kids.
When I was young, I saw American soldiers. Whenever they came, they would gather up everyone. They would bring cake and candy for the children. Everyone would have some, and then they would let us go home.
I never would have imagined, never would have thought Americans would kill us. When my children came home and asked if American soldiers were killers, I said, no, Americans don't kill.
Task Force Barker was set up around February. Its real function was to try and break the infrastructure of the North Vietnamese Army and the Viet Cong in that central plain of Quảng Ngãi Province.
Quảng Ngãi Province had a reputation for 300 years for hating foreign occupying forces, whether they were Chinese, French, Japanese, or Americans. They just did not like strangers coming in among them and then exercising military power.
Great areas of the province had been declared free fire zones. What that meant was you just kept up a constant round of the bombing of villages. The U.S. military loved to quote Mao Zedong, especially the saying that the guerrillas are the fish and the people are the sea. But their solution to that problem was to drain the sea.
Bullets can kill the enemy, but bullets can also make an enemy. They can manufacture an enemy. And I felt at times during my stay there that we were cranking out enemy soldiers or sympathizers by the way we treated the place.
Soldiers had thought they were going to go in there and be welcomed by the people who they were going to save. Some of them I thought it was going to be like going into Paris after D-Day. And what they encountered instead was hostility. Outright hostility and resentment from these people.
When I was 8 years old, I realized the war had come. There were many times when the American soldiers would set up operations around this area and raid and shoot. So my mother brought me and my siblings together and taught us to flee. Every night we had to crawl into the shelter to sleep. We had to avoid the American bombs and shootings. That was our misery. War from the Americans.
We started pulling regular patrols end of January, beginning of February. Once we started down to the Pinkville area, we started to lose people. They were being picked off one by one. This is when we got our initiation into the realities of Vietnam with booby traps, mines, snipers.
The Quảng Ngãi area was called Pinkville because on the military maps it was shaded a bright kind of shimmering pink. The color pink took on associations for us that went way beyond anything you'll find on some color chart. It meant the prospect of death.
Weber was the first member that we lost. That had a real impact on the whole company because we actually had somebody killed now.
We were down by a river and walking on the rice paddies, and we were going down to this village. It was kind of in a corner of the river, and we started taking sniper fire. Lieutenant Calley wanted us to go across the river to where that sniper fire was coming from. Well, we hadn't hardly got started, and there was a sniper round, and it got Bill Weber. He pretty well died on the scene, but not without a lot of anguish.
He was a good guy to everybody, you know, and when he got killed, that just like part of your family, they destroyed part of your family. Because that, I considered Charlie Company part of my family.
It wasn't long after that, we started taking more casualties.
We're in the process of crossing, receiving sporadic sniper fire, over.
When you're dealing with snipers, it's like a roulette wheel. You know, there's 30 or 40 of us out there walking around. Which one of us is going to get it? You know, it's a roll of the dice. And the same thing with the booby traps.
The infantryman lives on the ground. He walks on the ground, he sleeps on the ground, he eats on the ground. When you've got booby traps and landmines, all of a sudden the earth becomes the enemy in a way because you don't know what it may conceal.
Where do you sit? Where do you put your feet? There or there? And that choice is life or death.
Ski? Speak to me.
Yeah, I'm still alive.
Speak to me. What's your name? Tell me what your name is.
Yeah, I'm still with you.
Where are you from?
Steve, Seattle, Washington.
Seattle, Washington. Good town. Good town, good town. Very good.
Go to sleep, Doc.
Huh?
Can I go to sleep?
No, don't go to sleep. I don't want you to sleep at all. I don't want you going to sleep at all.
You can't fight. There's nothing to fight.
I need a knife. I need a knife. Here we go.
You can't fight a mine. You can't fight a booby trap. You can't fight a sniper. You can try and find that sniper and eliminate them, but they hit and run.
Get me out of here. You know, I just want to get up and yell, you know, and we did, you know. I said, we yelled, come on out, you know. But they wouldn't, you know, the snipers, they were probably over there laughing at us, you know, and they wouldn't come out. They wouldn't come out.
This went on for several weeks. They're gradually losing more and more wounded until they came to a minefield.
The second platoon was in one area, and first platoon was ahead of us in another area. But we walked into minefields almost simultaneously.
Once the first mine was tripped, anybody who moved was setting off booby traps. It was like nonstop. Somebody would go to try to help somebody trip the booby trap, they would hit a booby trap, they'd get blown up.
I could see them going off, and I heard people screaming, medic, medic. You lay there for a minute, then you know you gotta get up, you gotta go.
We were a close-knit group. We were there for each other, and that was the problem. Somebody got hurt, you went to help, regardless. You didn't care about the other mines, you went to help somebody. And in the end, it cost more individuals getting hurt.
Bobby Wilson was in my squad. We were in single file, and there was other guys behind us. And we were walking along, and this huge explosion went off, and it knocked me to the ground, and it was Bobby Wilson had tripped a bouncing Betty.
Bobby was pretty well split in half, right up the middle. And Medina was running through the minefield, barking out orders. He seemed to be fearless.
He was split as if somebody had taken a cleaver right up from his crotch all the way up to his chest cavity.
I've never seen anything that looked so unreal in my entire life. We took a poncho and we spread it out. The medic started to pick him up by the legs. I reached underneath his arms, placed him onto the poncho, and we set him on top of another mine. My company by this time had suffered approximately 25 to 28 casualties. I was down somewhere to the vicinity of 105 men.
I believe that the month of February was our most devastating month for Charlie Company. It drove us to the ground. It's just like if you had a wound and they would stick something in that wound and go a little bit deeper. Every time somebody else got killed, you know, it was like that wound and it'd go a little deeper. You know, and the hurt never stopped.
Down, boy. Get down. Over left.
Your mindset has to change, and you're going to somehow figure out how to adapt.
Hands down.
Your attitude towards the villagers now, everybody's an enemy. You don't know who to trust. You don't know who is a friend, who is a foe. You don't have a scorecard to tell you, well, this village over here is friendly to you, it's okay to go there. Or this village over here is sympathetic to the communists, and you start to wonder, who's who?
They know where the mines and booby traps are. They have to, or they can't work in the fields. They can't move between villages. You know, so they know where everything is. But they're not going to tell you. They're going to let you blow your leg off. You began to hate, and the hatred becomes very intense and very real.
Finally, you just throw the rule book away. The rules of the game have changed. Instead of just going through villages, casually going through them, you went into villages, started ripping shit apart. That became the standard now. We're not nice guys anymore.
Individuals would just come out of nowhere and do things that you just find hard to believe, you know. I remember one guy that held a young girl at gunpoint and made her perform oral sex on him, and then he cut off her ponytail and stuck it in his helmet. And it always mystified me how somebody could walk around with that ponytail and not get questioned about it. I don't think Medina had any interest in knowing all the details of what's going on out there.
If officers and NCOs start behaving badly, then there is absolutely nothing in a difficult situation where young men are feeling frightened for their lives, not knowing the difference. They expect to be shown what is right and what is wrong by the officers, by the NCOs. And when that discipline has fallen apart, then they were on the road to hell, frankly.
Dear Dad, how's everything with you? One of our platoons went out on routine patrol today and came across a 155mm round that was booby-trapped. It killed one man, blew the legs off 2 others, and injured 2 more. On their way back to the LZ, they saw a woman working in the fields. They shot and wounded her, then they kicked her to death and emptied their magazines into her head. It was murder. I'm ashamed of myself for not trying to do something about it. This isn't the first time, Dad. I've seen it many times before. My faith in my fellow men is all shot to hell. I just want the time to pass, and I just want to come home. Saturday, we're being dropped in by air in an NVA stronghold. We don't expect any letters for a while. Please keep writing them. I love and miss you and Mom.
By the time it got to the 15th of March, Charlie Company were pretty well wound up, but they were told that there was a very good opportunity the next day that they would meet the enemy head on. There was a lot of talk about a battalion, the 48th VC Infantry Battalion. They were thought to be a pretty crack outfit, and they were said to be housed in and around the My Lai area. The brigade commander, a man called Colonel Orrin Henderson, wanted his battalions to be much more aggressive with the enemy, and it's fair to say Henderson wound up Medina, and Medina wound up Charlie Company.
I told them this would give them a chance to engage the 48th VC Battalion, that the 48th VC Battalion is the one that we had been chasing around the Task Force Barker area of operation, and that we would finally get a chance to destroy the 48th VC Battalion.
Medina was psyched because here's our chance to confront the enemy. We're getting our revenge on you. We're going to tear your ass apart for what you've done to us.
We were to shoot literally anything that moved. If it was growing, cut it down. If it was a building, burn it. If it was a well, poison it. If it was alive, kill it.
I remember him telling us that the villagers had been warned out. There shouldn't be any innocents there. And I think there was even questions asked as how would we know if they're innocent or not? And he said something to the effect, if they're there, you got to assume they're the enemy.
There were no civilians. I say that is the crux of what was told to us. There are no civilians. You know, these are Viet Cong sympathizers. It's a Viet Cong stronghold. They are all Viet Cong.
Medina, I believe, was very clear that they were facing the 48th Viet Cong Infantry Battalion. That was the intelligence he had been given, and he had no reason to question it. The problem was that the information was wrong. The 48th Infantry Battalion were 150 miles away, on the other side of Quảng Ngãi Province. And so the entire premise for going to My Lai was entirely false.
The morning of the 16th started early. The mood was sort of somber, but there's an edge of excitement. We know that we're going into something big, and we're going to deal with them.
Little fear, anticipation. This was our chance to prove ourselves as a fighting unit.
We were instructed to pack a triple basic load of ammunition. Whereas a rifleman would carry 180 rounds, he was to triple that number. So we were expecting great resistance in that village.
I would say that probably most of us didn't eat very much. We were all anxious, concerned about what was going to be happening. This was going to be an all-out war. This was going to be shades of Iwo Jima.
The helicopters would ferry them in 3 groups and drop them in the paddy fields about 200 meters from the village. The first group of men would go through, led by Calley. The 2nd platoon would come in next. They would follow up with the 3rd platoon and Medina's group. This was the order that came down from on high. They would have to move forward quickly and very aggressively.
I was on the lead helicopter, and there's probably 9 helicopters and 6 gunships on the side of us. And I remember making a big turn and heading back north, straight for My Lai.
Cloud, this is Falcon 2-6, receiving fire, 9 o'clock, yellow smoke, 200 meters, automatic weapons, over.
We began hearing radio chatter that the helicopters were fired on.
This is Bill Mike guys, but...
The helicopter pilot turned to us and told us that we were coming into a hot LZ, the meaning which was quite clear. We were under fire. As we touched down, the door gunners were firing. There were rounds zinging kind of all around. It's hard to tell where they were coming from at that point. We hit the ground and almost immediately started firing into the village area.
Squad leaders, myself and others, are instructing their soldiers, let's get up on line, let's move it, you gotta get in position, we're gonna move out.
I remember somebody yelling, there's people moving in the village, and then we could see people running, and so we all opened up. I think we had it in our minds that we were not gonna get pinned down out there.
Roger, this is Shark 6. There is a whole lot of movement out to the southwest.
We assumed that we were going to hit VC only, that the civilians would be gone from that entire village. When we went in further, we did start finding people. Like they started coming out of their house, and we're saying, well, wait a minute, what the hell is this? They're not supposed to be in here. At first, nobody did anything. Then a couple crazy guys said, hey, they must be VC. Some of the guys started shooting.
Once the first civilian was killed, it was too late. Period. Whoever killed the first civilian, that was the end of the situation. It went out of control.
That was just shoot, shoot, shoot at anything. I don't care what moved. I mean, it's just, you know, the person would come out of a hut, bang, shoot. And it's just complete carnage there that day.
We did see bunkers, and we did start throwing grenades into the bunkers. It was about that time that we started hearing the screaming from inside.
Around 8:30, 3 American soldiers came to my house. They pushed 6 of us down into the shelter and threw a hand grenade in behind us. And then they used their machine guns to shoot us down. My entire family was blown into pieces. The only person left alive was me.
Suddenly, an American soldier came in carrying a gun. I saw my father collapse, and then my mother, my grandfather, and my grandmother. They all continued to fall. My brother, younger than me, only 3 years old. Suddenly, they blasted his head open. One shot, and his head blasted onto the floor.
We were a unit that was full of anger, frustration. We wanted contact. We wanted to fight the enemy. And we were told we were doing it.
I am a soldier, and I receive and obey the orders that are issued to me by my superiors. Their order was to kill or destroy everything in the village. The children happened to be there. The people of that village were Viet Cong or Viet Cong sympathizers. Maybe some see it differently. That's the way I see it.
I was the photographer on the operation of that day. I just photographed everything that I came upon. I was coming up to a group of people who were huddled, and they had some, American GIs surrounding them. One soldier spoke up and said, "Hey, here's a person with a camera." And sure enough, the soldiers backed off, and I moved up, and I took a photograph of these people. You can see the fear in the faces on there, especially the small children, and the older woman trying to protect the daughter. Then all of a sudden, that next instant, automatic fire. They were all shot, and they all dropped. I saw them drop to the ground.
As I recall that particular day, I was flying a gunship, tagging along behind the OH-23 flown by Hugh Thompson. We were told it was a typical combat assault near an area called Pinkville on the map. It was a strange-looking map for that particular area because it looked like there should be a lot of buildings and everything, but when you get out there, there's really not much of anything, just small hamlets scattered about. The OH-23, flown by Hugh Thompson, had a door gunner on either side, and he would fly low, treetop level, basically, trying to draw fire or make somebody run. It's pretty much a bait-type operation.
Hugh Thompson's job was supremely dangerous. The kill rate was something like 40 or 50%. I think that what motivated Hugh to join the Army was just his patriotism, his love for his country. He was a soldier's soldier. He was very much of a military mentality. His father was a lifer in the Navy. His brother joined the Air Force and served 2 or 3 tours of duty in Vietnam. He also thought that flying a helicopter would be a very exciting profession.
The morning of My Lai, Hugh Thompson and I came on station at about 7:30, and it was crystal clear. We came in at altitude and dropped down and started flying low level. We thought that we were really helping the men on the ground, and that was our main objective.
We came in and strafed the tree lines on either side of the landing zone to suppress anybody that might want to jump up and shoot. We got no fire. We were never fired upon.
We started to just check the perimeter. We saw people leaving the area, which was not unusual. It was a Saturday morning. People would go to market on Saturday morning. We thought, wonderful, they're getting out of the way. Let's continue our recon. We were off or out of that particular area for 10, 15, maybe 20 minutes. When we came back, those same people were dead or dying on the road.
At some point during the day, we started seeing bodies accumulate in the village. Women, kids. I'd never seen anything like that. It was bad.
We lingered by one of the bodies that we marked. It was a young female with a chest wound, but she was still alive. Mr. Thompson decided he'd move back, stay at a hover, and watch. And we saw a captain approach the woman, look down at her, kick her with his foot, step back, and just blew her away right in front of us. Later on, we found that it was Captain Medina, Ernest Medina, who did this.
As we got deeper into the village, we were given more or less a change of orders. And we were to stop firing and to start moving people that we found over toward the center and pushing them into the center of the village. And they were being picked up by Calley's platoon, more or less, and moved onward.
They started to take us all away. Everyone in the house, they took us to leave. All of us were taken away.
I held one of my children and led the other one. I walked with them until they told us to stop. They made us walk from inside the village, across the rice fields. I pulled my kids to go with me. I dragged my kids, but they still hit us, kicked us.
By the time they got out to the other side, they'd gathered together about 170 old men, elderly women, mothers with small children, and pushing them, herding them across to the eastern side of the village, near to where a big drainage ditch was situated. And they were all standing around on the edge of the ditch, and Calley was there with his platoon. And Hugh Thompson was flying around in his small scout helicopter.
In a ditch right where the red smoke is, we've got a dink with the...
We continued to recon, checked on some of the people we'd marked earlier with smoke. They were gone. At that point, Mr. Thompson noticed there was an irrigation ditch that he saw people in. So he landed the aircraft. He approached this soldier that was near the ditch and said, "These are civilians. We got to help them out." And the soldier said, "Yeah, we'll help them out of their misery." Mr. Thompson went through every scenario he could to give benefit of the doubt to the men on the ground. He did not want to believe that our people were doing this. And he came back, got in the aircraft. We lifted off, and we were 15, 20 feet off the ground, and we heard automatic weapons fire.
Suddenly, Calley gave the order to start firing, and Calley and a young man called mīʻltlēh turned their rifles, their M16 rifles, on this group and began shooting. Mothers started diving with their children into the ditch. One mother described it later as like ducks going into the water.
Lieutenant Calley told me, "Mīʻltlēh, we got another job to do." So we started pushing them off, and we started shooting them. So then all together we just pushed them all off and just started using automatics on them.
It didn't surprise me that Paul mīʻltlēh was one of the participants with Calley in shooting down that group of people. Paul did have a strong sense of duty. He just did what he was told. I've thought about what I would have done many times if Calley would have put me in the position he did Paul. And I would like to think I would have just said, "You got to be kidding me," and walked away and taken my chances that he wouldn't have shot me. I don't think I could have done it. I mean, I just really don't think I could have done it.
Calley yelled at me to come help him. And I just kept walking. I didn't even turn around and answer him. And I thought at the time, well, you know, that's disobeying an order. He could do anything he wants to me. But I didn't care. I wasn't going to help him kill people in the ditch. To this day, I always think to myself, what could I have done to stop it? And I don't know the answer to that.
They started to push all the people down into the ditch, including my family, and they started shooting at will. After the first round, my mother and I were still alive. So were my two younger siblings. After the second, my two younger siblings died, but my mother was still alive. At the third shooting, my mother died. To survive, I lay under my mother's stomach as the ditch filled with blood.
My daughter, Leanne, I used my breast to cover her mouth so she wouldn't cry. I saw my father walking around. I wanted to tell him, "Please lie down, Dad. If you do, you will live." But I didn't dare say it. I just let my father walk around there, and they went over there and shot him. Half of his head blew away.
I was coming out of the other end of the village, and Calley was standing at a low point, and he was waving us and directing us across the ditch. And I got to the ditch, and it was full of bodies. And that's when your senses just shut down. I mean, To this day, I don't know how I walked across that ditch. I remember looking down and making eye contact with somebody in the ditch, and it was like I was looking at a mannequin.
Mr. Thompson was just beside himself. He got on the radio and just said, "This isn't right. These are civilians. There's people killing civilians down here," and that's when he decided to intervene.
And you have 15 Victor Charlie.
He said, "We've got to do something about this. Are you with me?" And we said, "Yes."
Thompson now sees a small group of Vietnamese people running along a hedgerow, running for their lives, heading for a bunker. And in hot pursuit of them are the men from Charlie Company.
Mr. Thompson calculated they had less than 30 seconds to live. He told us, "I'm going to go over to the bunker and get these people out myself. And if these American soldiers fire on these people or me when I'm getting them out of the bunker, shoot them." I remember thinking, how did we get into this?
I was probably less than 50 yards from this helicopter. And I remember the door gunners of that helicopter pointing their machine guns directly at me and thinking, oh my God, what are they gonna do?
3 people came out, 6 people came out, 12 people, 11 or 12 people came out of this little bunker. That's when he got on the radio and called a friend of his, Dan Malyans, a gunship pilot. And he said, "Danny, I need a favor."
Hugh and his crew had a group of people gathered up to be taken out. And I landed the helicopter, put them on, and we left with them. A gunship just never landed out in the boonies like that to pick up somebody. It was just not done. I don't know why we did it, other than the fact that those people need to be out of there.
We went back to the ditch, and I saw some motion down in the ditch. I saw this child move.
I lifted my head up and saw a helicopter landing in the rice fields. I was really scared. Wasn't sure if they would shoot again. But when I lifted my head, I saw 3 American soldiers approach, so I pretended to be dead. But the Americans, the 3 of them came down into the ditch. I looked up a second time, and they came and pulled me out.
I remember taking the boy in my left hand by the back of his shirt, thinking, I hope these buttons are sewn on, or if the shirt lets go, I'm going to lose the boy. Mr. Thompson knew that Quảng Ngãi Hospital wasn't too far away. We left the boy with a nun at the hospital. Told the nun he probably doesn't have any family.
Time just seemed like to go on. An hour could have passed, or 5 minutes could have passed. After we got in so far, we did get a ceasefire. And then you'd still hear a couple guns shoot off, and then you hear the ceasefire again. And then it was quiet.
They left my village in blood and fire. Wives lost husbands and children lost fathers. And our homeland and village were destroyed.
When there were no more sounds of guns, they came home to bury the dead. I ran home and there was nothing left. My house was burned and destroyed. I couldn't recognize my relatives. They were all burned. There was nothing left. My grandmother, I called to her, "Grandma, Grandma." I thought she was almost dead. She raised her hand up She said, "Grandma's here, dear, lying here. They shot me right in my arm." When I called to my sister, she was outside. She just lay there unconscious. But when she heard me call, she woke up and crawled over. The three of us hugged each other and cried. We were covered in blood.
The cover-up of My Lai began immediately. As soon as they got back to their base, too many people knew that something odd had gone on. Already, Captain Medina had radioed to the headquarters, giving false figures for how many enemy killed in action there'd been. The official count was that 123 Viet Cong had been killed. So that cover-up was constituted within hours, really, of them arriving home.
After the My Lai operation and we returned to base camp, Captain Medina told us, do not answer any questions from anyone, news reporters or anybody else, about this last mission.
We all thought that we were going to get in big trouble. And so we didn't talk much about it.
The rest of that day, we just started moving on deeper into the peninsula. We were told to take the high ground. And Medina specifically said, don't go past the wire because there's an old Korean compound up there and it's heavily mined. We got to the wire and Calley said, okay, you, and you, we're going up the top. And Calley took mīʻltlēḥ as the point man. They just barely got out of sight, and mīʻltlēḥ stepped on a mine, blew his foot off. And when they were medevacing him out, the last thing he yelled at Calley was, "God got me, he'll get you," for what we did.
I don't remember if it was that day or the next day. All I remember is I was wearing the same fatigues, and they were covered in blood. Mr. Thompson wanted me to come up and meet him and report what we'd seen to Colonel Henderson. Hugh went in first, came out, didn't say anything, just showed me the door. I went in and told Colonel Henderson exactly that there was unnecessary killing of civilians going on that day. A lot of civilians. He made a couple notes on a legal pad, didn't really react to it in any particular way, dismissed me, and I left. I met Hugh outside the command bunker. He was having a fit. I think he broke the flight helmet. He threw it on the ground. He wanted to tear his wings off his uniform, said he'd never fly again.
Thompson reported this to his commanding officer in hopes of getting action, and there was no action, there was no word, there was no buzz, no nothing.
After My Lai, they sent him out by himself in very dangerous areas. He crashed 4 or 5 helicopters within a 2-3 month period. And he was beginning to think, and I don't think he was being irrational, he thought that someone was trying to make him go away.
The higher-ups in the Army understood that something like this could get them court-martialed, could get the men under them court-martialed. So the picture that the military publicity machine attempted to put out was that there was no My Lai massacre, that American soldiers were not involved in the killing and the slaughter of women and children and old people. This is simply communist propaganda, and it's not true.
This is 1968. Killing civilians by that time in Vietnam was an issue because, of course, all the way up to Johnson, they were trying to calm people down in the United States. So there wasn't any doubt about the reason for them wanting to cover it up.
Following the My Lai incident, Charlie Company was sent out into the jungle for over 2 months straight.
We were isolated and put out in the mountains. It was like somebody putting us out there so we wouldn't talk to anybody.
"54 days. 54 days we were out. No change of clothes hardly. We were sick. We all got dysentery.
I truly believe that we were sent there to never return. That we were never going to make it out of there. And that just stuck in my mind. Why are they doing this? Why are they sending us out at night? You know, to get rid of these 12 people here? And then next night they send another 12 and get them? The company changed after that. And it was like nobody cared anymore. That, you know, it was all, it had all been a game and the game was over. And we got whooped.
I had been told of the incident several times by several different people, and it became evident to me that there was a very real amount of truth behind the stories I had been told.
Ron Ridenour was an aspirant journalist. He'd gone out to Vietnam to do his time there and had formed some very close friendships with members of Charlie Company. They were sitting down one day telling war stories, and his friend said to him, "Hey, did you hear what happened at Pinkville?" And he said, "No, what happened at Pinkville?" He said, "Well, we went in there and we just killed everybody." He said, "What?" Ridenour made a promise to himself that he would see if he could get some more evidence of this and bring it to the attention of the authorities.
After my return from Vietnam, I wrote a letter, a long, definitive letter, which explained what the situation was as I knew it, and exactly how I came across the information, and what information I had, and I called for an investigation. I made 30 copies of this letter and sent out 30 copies to various congressional leaders and administration.
Inquiries started to be made of the American military. Where is this place, Pinkville? What has happened here? One of the investigators of the Inspector General's Corps is sent out to interview members of Charlie Company who are still in the military and subject to military discipline. And in very short order, the information goes up the chain of command, and people in the Pentagon know that something pretty awful has happened.
The machinery of justice starts moving, and so it's not going to be kept inside the Army. And finally, Haberle decides to sell those pictures.
The Cleveland Plain Dealer printed today a series of photographs it says it got from an Army combat photographer, and it says the pictures show the bodies of South Vietnamese killed by the Americans.
Everybody saw those pictures. The pictures appeared in Life magazine and on nightly news stories over and over again.
We'll now show the pictures published in the Plain Dealer and photographed from the newspaper, accounting for the poor quality. They were taken by Ronald Haberle while on a combat assignment for the Army.
The pictures become almost ubiquitous, and they symbolize evil. And the more they're shown, the more difficult it is to kind of defend what happened at My Lai, or even to look at whatever extenuating circumstances might have been there at My Lai.
Survivors have claimed that an American infantry patrol sweeping through their village in March last year executed more than 500 unarmed men, women, and children.
It still isn't known exactly what happened in the Vietnamese village of My Lai, scene of multiple killings of civilians about 18 months ago. There are numerous charges.
I got off work and I stopped at a bar to have a beer. And the news was on, and it flashed a picture of Calley. And I thought, my God, that's my unit. You know, and they brought up Medina's name, and then I'm listening to people at the bar, them effing baby killers, this, and that. And I just kind of sipped my beer.
I was going to junior college, and over breakfast, I heard on the radio that the Army was investigating a massacre in Vietnam. And I remember thinking, I hope that's not the one that I was involved in.
Do you believe that there was a cover-up of this incident in South Vietnam, of the incident at My Lai 4?
I have no reason to believe there was.
There was a huge uproar in the country. The top of the Army were absolutely furious that something like this could have happened 2 years before, nearly, and been held so that they knew nothing about it. So they really wanted to find out what had happened and how and who had covered it up.
They had to look for somebody who was a member of the team, but was not necessarily going to be accused of covering up a cover-up. And the person they fell upon was Ray Pearce. Pearce had been a corps commander in Vietnam. He'd had a very distinguished military career, and he was a deeply, deeply honorable and decent man.
General, is there any doubt in your mind now that a massacre did take place at My Lai on March 16th, 1968?
That's one of the things we're trying to determine.
Pearce made the decision, look, before I can decide what's been covered up, I got to know what happened. And the only way we're going to know what happened is to talk to everybody that was there that will talk to us. There were maybe 800 people in this battalion. And we had to contact every one of them and try to arrange for them to come to Washington and testify.
When it finally registers and sinks in that there's something going on was when you actually started getting subpoenaed to the Peers Committee. What kind of trouble were we in? We don't know.
We were picked up in a military limousine, unmarked, and taken to the Pentagon, and I don't know how many levels down we went, but we went down. We went into what somebody referred to as a war room, and there were gigantic maps of My Lai all the way around the room, and they sit us down at the end of the table with a microphone in front of us. You're feeling pretty small.
The next witness is Sergeant Gregory T. Olson.
Morning, Sergeant Olson. I show you also a 1 to 25,000 scale map, which has been introduced in evidence as Exhibit Map 4. Could you take us through the village step by step?
Well, I've
on there?
seen some of my friends shoot women, children, babies.
After you'd gotten out of the helicopter here in the landing zone, could you tell us the first thing that happened?
I was in the second lift. We landed here.
All right. Could you mark about the location on there of the CP and just put a figure 1 and circle it? And which side of the village were you on? Were you on the left or the right?
Who was on your right? Who was on your left? Who was in front of you? Who was on the side of you? What happened? What time was this? Trying to, I assume, at that time I didn't realize, that they were trying to synchronize, are you lying?
Pearce was distressed, terribly distressed. The accumulation of all these things over the weeks of testimony really got to him, I think. And when he then would come across someone like Hugh Thompson, the helicopter pilot, it was almost a relief to him to realize that there are still really good Americans.
I would like you to repeat what you told the colonel at
at that particular interrogation?
I'd told him about seeing the wounded Vietnamese. I told him that the captain had came over and shot one of them. Told him about seeing the bodies in the ditch.
How many bodies did you tell him were in the ditch?
I think I said about 100, sir.
How did you feel at this particular time?
Felt like there had been a massacre.
In Pierce's mind, Thompson had done just what you'd want a soldier to do. And almost nobody else ever had, and nothing happened as a result of it.
What shocked Pierce was that people who were in a position to prevent it happening had not done so, and then when they had knowledge that something had gone wrong, had actually then covered it up.
Did Mr. Thompson mention anything to you about landing alongside of a ditch that contained a large number of bodies?
No, sir.
Did he mention to you seeing a sergeant point his weapon in the direction of a ditch which contained some dead non-combatants?
No, sir, he did not report to me any incident of a U.S. soldier firing into a ditch filled with non-combatants or with anybody.
I think General Pierce was frustrated by his inability to get any kind of sensible explanations from Henderson, and concluded that Henderson, well, he was both incompetent and lying.
Now, I feel that the public is entitled to know that our inquiry clearly established that a tragedy of major proportions occurred there on that day.
Pierce knew that his report should be completely truthful, and it had resulted in some 30 people from up through the ranks, from lieutenant all the way up to a two-star general, being charged with offences involved in the cover-up itself.
At Fort Benning, Georgia today, the prosecution opened its case against First Lieutenant William Calley Jr., charged with the murder of more than 100 South Vietnamese civilians at My Lai.
I was an Army prosecutor at Fort Benning, Georgia. The first case was going to be against Lieutenant Calley because he was to be discharged from the service in September of that year. And under the law, once he was discharged, the Army would no longer have jurisdiction to prosecute him. So there was some time constraints. He was not charged with the massacre. He was charged with what he did. That was not everything that was done in that operation. But I will say this, that the evidence clearly demonstrated that he was responsible for more killing than anybody else there by a long shot.
Gentlemen, the accused stands here before you today, charged with 4 specifications, premeditated murder, are alleged to have taken place in the village of My Lai 4, 16 March 1968.
This was going to be the first case in which the story in its entirety would be told. And so I wanted to tell the story in such a way for the jury to know, both circumstantially and directly, all of the evidence, to demonstrate quite clearly that what those charges said had occurred, had in fact occurred. These people were murdered, as we allege they were murdered. They were unarmed, they were unresisting, they were children, and they were babies.
I'll ask you whether, in your opinion, you were acting rightly and according to your understanding of your directions and orders.
I felt then, and I still do, that I acted as I was directed. I carried out the orders that I was given.
and I do not feel wrong in doing so, sir.
If the orders for that operation included unarmed, unresisting men, women, children, and babies, it was illegal. And a soldier has a duty to disobey such an order.
A lot of people talk about My Lai and they say, well, you know, yeah, but you can't follow an illegal order. Trust me, there is no such thing, not in the military. If I go into a combat situation, I tell them, no, I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to follow that order. They put me up against the wall and shoot me.
You train a man to soldier, you take him out of civilian life, you teach him to be a soldier, you train him to kill, you train him to follow orders, you express to him the importance of following orders, and you train him to kill.
True, we kill our enemies, but there comes a point in time at which you don't kill your enemy. He's entitled to be treated humanely. The most serious offense outside of war is the taking of a human life. And in war, there has to be limits. I told the jury, finally, I wanted to speak for the victims. And I reminded them they did not receive any trial. And I said, what were their crimes, these victims? Was it the crime of an infant simply to have been born in My Lai? What were their crimes? And I said to them, at the end of the day, you are the conscience of our country when you render this verdict.
If I have committed a crime, the only crime that I have committed is in judgment of my values. Apparently, I valued my troops' lives more than I did that of the enemy. When my troops were getting massacred and mauled by an enemy I couldn't see, I couldn't feel, and I couldn't touch. And that was my enemy out there. And when it became between me and that enemy, I had to value the lives of my troops. And I feel that is the only crime I have committed.
Lieutenant William Calley has been found guilty. A jury that deliberated a record 13 days after the longest court-martial in American military history found Calley guilty on all 4 counts arising from the killing of innocent, unarmed South Vietnamese civilians at the village of My Lai.
I don't think there has ever been a verdict which has been more controversial or generated a greater public outcry of opposition than the verdict in that case. There were mass protests around the country, draft boards were resigning, veterans were turning in their medals. It was enormous, overwhelming.
My name is William Calley. I'm a soldier of this land. I've tried to do my duty and to gain the upper hand. But fate made me out a villain. They have stamped me with a brand as we go marching home.
It was a country that wanted this war to end, and a country which didn't want to believe that this had happened, but if it did, wanted to say that it's our fault collectively and not his fault.
Calley's been used. All the wars we've had in the United States, we pick one man out of all them wars and say he committed atrocities against the enemy.
Well, all of us are soldiers, we're too busy to complain as we go marching home.
Good evening. President Nixon has ordered Lieutenant William Calley released from the stockade and confined to his quarters, pending review of his conviction of life sentence for the My Lai Massacre. The announcement came amid a deluge of telegrams to the White House, 25,000 a day, called the greatest expression of public sentiment by far on any issue of the Nixon presidency.
Within a very short space of time, President Nixon, trying to cope with some of the political fallout from this, had decided that while his appeal hearings were being held, Lieutenant Calley should not be in prison, but he could be out on bail.
President, you said that you intervened in the Calley case in the national interest. I wonder if you could define for us in greater detail
how you feel it was served by your intervention in the case.
I felt that it was proper for me to indicate that I would review the case because there was great concern expressed throughout the country as to whether or not this was a case involving, as it did, so many complex factors in which Captain Calley was going to get a fair trial.
Ultimately, he had to serve in total about 4 months in the stockade at Fort Leavenworth, and by that time it was deemed that he had served enough time and he was released.
I think that Nixon's intervention passed the word that nobody is going to get punished for what happened here. And so don't worry about it, people. And the result of this was to completely undermine any further prosecutions of other officers.
Okay, get out of the way, please.
Calley got away with it. And all the other people who were involved got away with it also.
Did you ever have any doubts?
No, I never had that actual feeling that I would be convicted. I always thought that my innocence would be proven in a court of law. I've always maintained that position, and I'm glad it's over with.
I finally decided I had to say something. I wanted to make the president aware of my feelings about the case and the jurors and the victims and the rule of law. I truly regret having to have written this letter and wish that no innocent person had died at My Lai on March 16, 1968. But innocent people were killed under circumstances that will always remain abhorrent to my conscience. While in some respects what took place at My Lai has to be considered a tragic day in the history of our nation, the greatest tragedy of all will be if political expediency dictates the compromise of such a fundamental moral principle as the inherent unlawfulness of the murder of innocent persons, making the action and the courage of 6 honorable men who served their country so well meaningless.
If you take the total number of people who died at My Lai, which was 507, and put that alongside the 2 million civilians who died, it doesn't seem very much. But in terms of impact on America and on the rest of the world, about how they conducted that war, clearly it changed people's opinions towards the war. It was too big a price to pay that if you were going to have to win this war by this kind of conduct, then it wasn't a price worth paying.
People had been saying to themselves, well, what are we doing to these people? What are we doing to them? And then with My Lai, people began to say, what is it doing to us?
Oh, it hurts me thinking about the innocent people that got killed. It hurts me now. It hurts me now more than it did then. Because then you're thinking about living. You get out and you're a civilian, you think about dying.
It's been a while. Now I can sleep, but every once in a while, I dream again about how my father died, how my sister died, how they died next to me. I saw it all. I remember all the time.
I could go back and remember all the sleepless nights that we had, everything that went on, My Lai, all the people that were killed here. Every day I try to make it easy. I thought that by drinking that I could make it easy and make it go away. I'd lay down at night, it's still the same thing. Whether I drank or whether I didn't drink, it's still the same thing. Just the memories kept It kept coming back, kept coming back.
I will never forget. When I'm reminded, I suddenly remember the pain. A chapter in the book opens. There is no way I will ever forget. I will never forget.
As far as living with the shame of My Lai, I have no shame. I did what I was supposed to be doing. The shame rests with the politicians and the military, not with me, the other members of Charlie Company, Lieutenant Calley, or Captain Medina. The shame lays with them. It's a national shame.
Exclusive corporate funding for American Experience is provided by Liberty Mutual. Major funding is made possible by the Alfred P. Sloan Foundation. American Experience is also made possible by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting and viewers like you. Thank you.